The brutal massacre of a 24-year-old graduate student Anastasia Yeshchenko shocked not only the northern capital, but also the whole of Russia. The girl died at the hands of her teacher and common-law husband, 63-year-old historian Oleg Sokolov, a man well known in the scientific world. The man shot Anastasia, butchered her body and began dumping the remains into the Moika River. Everything that was happening was caught on camera from the street. Oleg Valeryevich Sokolov was born in 1956 year in Leningrad. In 1979 year, he graduated from the Physics and Mechanics faculty of Leningrad Polytechnic University with a degree in physics engineering and entered the evening department of the LSU Faculty of History. Sokolov received his diploma with honors, and in the 91st year he successfully defended his PhD thesis. He was engaged in the history of France, and his love for Napoleon was called fantastic by his relatives, and he himself liked to go out in the image of Bonaparte.
Hey, I'm not going to beat around the bush. You have to subscribe to the channel and like it so you don't miss new videos.
Sokolov's scientific achievements were appreciated not only in Russia, but also in Europe. In the 2003 year, the President of France even awarded him the Legion of Honor. In addition, he was a visiting professor at the Practical School of Higher Studies at the Sorbonne. However, there are several such episodes in Sokolov's biography that go against his resume of a real St. Petersburg intellectual. For example, he quarreled with a colleague, publicist Yevgeny Panasenkov. Sokolov, as stated by his opponent, used excerpts from his works in his book and was convicted of plagiarism. This was the reason for the trial. It would be possible to turn a blind eye to this, because such disputes are not uncommon in the scientific community. But Panasenkov claims that it's not just plagiarism. He allegedly tried to warn people that Sokolov was dangerous to society. And, as it turned out, these words were not an empty sound. The tragedy occurred on the 7th of November, but they learned about the incident only 2 days later. And that, in fact, thanks to chance. Early in the morning of the 9th of November, a taxi driver noticed an elderly man who was floundering in the Moika River. The victim was pulled out of the river and handed over to the doctors. Together with him, a backpack was taken out of the water, the contents of which shocked the police. It turned out that a bather brought women's hands and a traumatic pistol to the embankment. It was not difficult to establish the identity of the rescued person. He turned out to be a 63-year-old associate professor Oleg Sokolov. The mutilated body of his graduate student and lover Anastasia Yeshchenko was found in the apartment of the historian. They often appeared together at reenactments, costumed balls, and wrote several scientific papers. Sokolov assessed the situation and decided to confess what he had done. He said that he quarreled with a young mistress and allegedly shot her in a state of passion. At the same time, the scientist did not panic. He hid the girl's body in one of the rooms and, as if nothing had happened, received guests who, by the way, did not notice anything unusual. Sokolov decided to get rid of the body in a classic way, to saw it in pieces and drown it in the river. He bought a saw, got down to business, but in the process he periodically became ill, so he took a sip of the bottle. The associate professor managed to send part of Anastasia's remains to the bottom, but the backpack with his hands did not want to sink in any way. As a result, Sokolov, who had already managed to get pretty drunk, fell into the water himself. At the time of Sokolov's detention, there were two versions of the conflict. The first, the deceased was in conflict with Sokolov's daughters from a previous marriage, and the second, an elderly teacher, was jealous of his young lover to her peers. The historian tried to convince the investigation that he was forced to shoot the girl, as she allegedly rushed at him with a knife. He also stated that he suffered because of the death of his beloved and even intended to commit suicide. He planned to put on the uniform of Napoleon and die in the Peter and Paul fortress in front of the townspeople and tourists. The court sent the scientist under arrest for 2 months until the 8th of January, 2020 year, and the university management decided to dismiss him. It was only after the death of Sokolov's young lover that other stories were made public, which make one wonder whether such a finale was so unexpected. So, the journalists managed to find out that the historian, who was then a little over 30, met one of his wives at school. Only now his chosen one turned out to be an elderly colleague, and one of the students. Already at that time, according to another former student, there were some oddities in Sokolov's behavior. A former student of Oleg Sokolov said, he behaved completely frivolously. He constantly behaved as if he was Napoleon. His sense of self-importance was bursting. Therefore, he took any hint that someone did not fully admire him very aggressively. I remember that my friend and I were giggling once, and he noticed us. His lips were trembling and his eyes were bloodshot. Another story happened in the 2008 year, when one of the students of the Faculty of History filed a statement to the police, accusing Sokolov of bullying and threats. According to the girl, she was in a romantic relationship with the historian, and when she decided to stop them, he reacted inappropriately. From the text of the statement, Sokolov grabbed my hands from behind and began to tie me with a rope, which, as I understood, he had prepared in advance. I began to resist and asked to explain what was going on. Sokolov began to raise his hand at me, after which he tied me to a chair. I was absolutely helpless, unable to resist. Sokolov went into the next room while I remained tied to a chair in the hallway. He came back from the room with an iron and plugged it into the socket before my eyes. When the iron got hot, he brought it to my face, so that I could feel the heat coming from it, and began to threaten that he would disfigure me for life. After that, he began methodically mocking me, hitting me in the face, head, chest and stomach. To all my pleas to stop and come to his senses, he only began to mock me even more. And then he said that he would take my life, and bury my body at the nearest construction site, where I was unlikely to be found. A criminal case against the associate professor was not initiated. Moreover, he retained his position at the department. And the story was buried until the 2018 year, when the victim decided to tell the media about it. Well, then no measures were taken, although, according to the history faculty, the unacceptable behavior of the teacher was no secret to anyone. Maxim Zik, historian, said, all the girls of the faculties were aware of his deviant behavior and usually harshly sent him in the appropriate direction. But in any rule there is an exception, and someone became his mistress. Moreover, he was a jealous and aggressive person, and if some girl contacted him, she got into an extremely unpleasant situation, from which it was not so easy to get out. For this man tried to keep his chosen one by any means. Now a petition has appeared on the internet demanding that the university's management be held accountable, which turned a blind eye to numerous complaints. The St. Petersburg tragedy caused a storm of indignation in social networks and the media. Very few people decided to stand up for the learned one. Most of the former and current students, as well as colleagues of the historian, speak directly about the unacceptability of his behavior. His opponent, the historian Yevgeny Panasenkov, was the first to speak out, quite predictably. A year ago, I posted a statement on the YouTube channel that Oleg would deal with a student. He spoke about it directly. The university, like the police, ignored my messages. He recalled that Sokolov had recently lost to him in court and could not cope with stress, and decided to take out cello on his mistress. In addition, he hinted that not everything is clean with the death of the scientist's first wife. On December 25, 2020, in court, a 64-year-old historian and one of the best experts on the history of France of the Napoleonic era was found guilty of the brutal massacre of a girl. The hall barely accommodated everyone. For Anastasia Yeshchenko's parents, they even made an exception and put them on the jury seats. The state prosecution asked for 15 years in prison, Sokolov's defenders, almost half as much. And as a result, Oleg Sokolov was sentenced to 12.5 years in a high-security penal colony. Taking into account the time already spent in jail, the presence of elderly parents and merits in the field of historical science,